The night the map caught fire, the Durand Line lit up like a fault line. Border checkpoints on the high, cold ridges of the Afpak frontier buckled under violent pressure as small arms, rockets, and old Soviet howitzers cracked the silence. Before dawn, Pakistani jets were punching holes into Taliban facilities on the Afghan side, and the entire frontier felt like a drumhead stretched too tight. By 8 a.m. Central on Sunday, October 12th, 2025, the outline was unmistakable. A border skirmish had torn open into a dangerous, multi-sector fight, and both sides were racing to shape the story. This isn't a slow burn. It's a spark landing in tinder that has piled up for months, years if we're honest. Islamabad's security officials framed the night as a response to unprovoked fire from Afghanistan, reporting firefights at more than half a dozen locations. Kabul's Taliban authorities insisted they were answering for a previous airstrike in the Afghan capital. In the haze between their narratives lies the only certainty. The border roared and people died. Let's rewind the tape. About a week before the border erupted, the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, ambushed and killed 11 Pakistani soldiers, including 2 officers, in the northwest during an intelligence-based operation. It was one more deadly waypoint in a grim trend line. Since the TTP Islamabad ceasefire collapsed in November 2022, insurgent attacks in Pakistan's northwest have ticked upward like a bad fever. Islamabad's answer came on October 9th. Pakistani airstrikes, including in Kabul, reportedly went after TTP leader Noor Wali Masood. The Taliban's defense ministry condemned the strikes as a violation of Afghan sovereignty, citing hits in Paktika as well. In other words, the fuse for this weekend's violence wasn't just lit, it was already burning toward the powder keg. Then came the night of October 11th to 12th. According to the Pakistani side, Taliban forces initiated with small arms, mortars, RPGs, and even D-31 22mm howitzers firing across the border. There were also small unit raids aimed at grabbing outposts, a tactic the Taliban say worked, at least in some sectors. It's the kind of border fight that looks simple on a map, but feels unbelievably complicated on the ground. 1,000 meters of rock and dust stuffed with the firepower of a battalion. The casualty claims illustrate the fog of war. Pakistan reported 23 soldiers killed in a single night, a number that lands like a hammer no matter where you stand. Islamabad also claimed it killed upward of 200 Taliban and allied fighters. Meanwhile, Taliban spokesmen boasted they had killed 58 Pakistani personnel and wounded 30 more, while losing just 9 of their own and suffering 16 to 18 wounded. The Taliban also claimed the capture of 3 Pakistani border posts, while Pakistani officials said they destroyed several Afghan positions. At this early hour, verifiable evidence remains scarce. The information space is muddy, the vantage points few, and the bias is thick on every side. But even through the fog, you can see the scale of the night. Islamabad's official line came fast and hard. State media described a coordinated Taliban assault repelled across the frontier and announced precision fires and strikes, as well as raids on Taliban camps, posts, and training facilities. Pakistan said targets included networks linked not only to the TTP, labeled here as FAK, but also FAH, a shorthand the statement used for Baluch, separatist elements, and ISKP, the Islamic State Khorasan province. The messaging was unmistakable. Afghanistan is harboring multiple terrorist threats, and Pakistan will keep striking until they're neutralized. The statement emphasized efforts to avoid collateral damage, claimed multiple Taliban locations destroyed along the border, and said 21 hostile positions inside Afghanistan were briefly taken in physical captures before being vacated. It ended with a warning to Kabul: take immediate and verifiable action against FAK, FAH, and ISKP, or Pakistan will persist. The rhetoric also threw shade beyond the frontier. Islamabad noted with theatrical timing that the Taliban's alleged provocation occurred during the Afghan foreign minister's visit to India, repeatedly described as the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the region. Whether you buy that or not, the thrust is clear. Pakistan is locking the narrative onto a triptych of enemies: TTP, Baloch militants, and ISKP. Under an Afghan umbrella, it says is providing cover, with Delhi lurking in the background. In language that echoes the early war on terror, the statement declared Pakistan would not tolerate Afghan soil being used for attacks, and pledged to keep neutralizing targets until the threat is completely eliminated. There's a larger shadow here. UN-backed monitoring has reported al-Qaeda's resurgence in Afghanistan since Kabul fell to the Taliban, even as ISKP has shown a growing appetite for operations abroad, from a bombing in Tehran to major strikes inside Russia. Those details matter because they widen the aperture. This crisis isn't just a border shootout. It's a potential magnet for every threat hiding in the Afghan hills. On the Taliban side, there was a very different victory lap. In a press conference in Kabul, a spokesperson claimed that an overnight operation along the Durand Line overran more than 20 Pakistani checkpoints, then halted after mediation by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. He alleged that, despite the pause, Pakistan continued firing artillery into Helmand and Paktika the next morning, warning that the Taliban would respond if attacks persisted. If true, that paints a distinct picture: a rapid, hard punch, followed by a diplomatic off-ramp, at least on paper, countered by continued Pakistani strikes from the air and the gun line. In practice, it looks messier. Footage suggests Pakistan kept hitting Taliban military facilities, and that the tempo of airstrikes remained high. There's a bitter irony in the equipment. Some of the very Afghan bases and D-30 howitzers once handed to the Afghan National Army are now reportedly in Taliban hands and firing into Pakistan. For Western veterans who trained ANA artillery units a decade ago, seeing those sites hit by Pakistani jets is the kind of whiplash only this region can produce. Yesterday's partner battery becomes today's target list in the span of a single collapsed state. Stack the claims side by side and you glimpse the fight's anatomy. Taliban forces, good at raids, ambushes and quick seizures, probe the frontier with mortars, RPGs, and the old Soviet field gun. Pakistan, with a vastly superior conventional toolkit, answers from the sky. No quantity of captured Humvees, paraded optics, or shiny trophies will stop a mature air force once it's cleared to dig in. If this escalates, it will likely look like it does now: the Taliban harassing along the line, Pakistan pounding the depth with precision strikes. Nobody's telegraphing armoured divisions crossing in daylight. Everyone is lighting matches. So how did we get here? Structurally, the TTP's campaign of pressure inside Pakistan, the collapse of the ceasefire in late 2022, and Islamabad's insistence that TTP leadership finds safe harbour in Afghanistan all converge into this weekend's kinetic moment. Islamabad says it struck the TTP head, Noor Wali Masood, in Kabul on October 9th. The Taliban condemned a breach of sovereignty. 3 days later, guns along the frontier start talking. It plays like a classic tit for tat, except the tit is an airstrike in a capital and the tat is a multi-sector border assault. That's not escalation control. That's a black diamond slope and a broken ski. Here's the layer beneath the headlines. Pakistan's statement bundled threats together: TTP, FAH/Baloch militants, and ISKP under a single Afghan umbrella. That's partly messaging, partly battlefield reality. ISKP isn't a Taliban subordinate, far from it, but it nests in the same terrain, and it's proved it can think beyond Afghanistan's borders with lethal imagination. When a state like Pakistan says it's targeting terror training camps and support networks, that's a big net thrown into very crowded water. You don't need to stretch to see how quickly that net can snag the wrong fish. And then there's the information war. Independent reporting from inside Afghanistan is sparse. Much of what we're getting right now traces to Pakistani sources or Taliban press briefings. That means claims ping-pong across state media and social feeds, while footage, some new, some recycled, fills the gaps. Translation: we know enough to be alarmed, not enough to be certain. The one piece everyone agrees on is escalation. The border is hotter today than it was last week, and jets are still taking off. The battlefield mechanics point to a short-term pattern. Expect more skirmishing at night, fast raids on isolated posts, and harassing fire from mortars and howitzers whenever the clouds cooperate. Expect Pakistan's Air Force to keep hunting fixed sites, ammo dumps, training camps, vehicle parks, gun lines, while artillery punishes any Taliban battery that lights up. And expect both sides to claim decisive wins after every exchange. Because in wars like this, the scoreboard is as powerful as the shrapnel. If you're wondering whether this tips into a full ground war, the answer is unlikely in the immediate term and disastrous if it did. Pakistan has the conventional edge. The Taliban knows it. The comparative advantage for Kabul's rulers is guerrilla craft, speed, irregularity, and the ability to vanish into the hills by daybreak. That's not built for decisive maneuvers across open frontier. It's engineered to bleed an enemy who dares to overextend. For now, the center of gravity is air power versus insurgent reach. The Taliban can sting, Pakistan can smash. Which one matters more depends on who loses patience first.
The regional spillover risk is the elephant in the room. Pakistan explicitly pointed to India while framing this crisis, casting Delhi as the hand behind separatist elements. That charge won't shock anyone in South Asia. Accusations like these are as common as tea, but including it in a hot war statement ratchets tension. A trilateral blame frame, Pakistan versus Taliban Afghanistan with India invoked, stacked on top of cross-border strikes, is exactly the kind of geometry strategists lose sleep over. You don't need many miscalculations for this to drag in more players. Let's talk people and places, not just units and acronyms. The communities living along this border are the ones who always pay for the cartography of violence. When a D-30 battery hammers a Pakistani position, some kid in a mud brick village hears the same crack you do on the news, only he also has to dive for the floor. When a Pakistani JDAM collapses a weapon store carved into a hillside, the shockwave doesn't ask which flag the neighbors prefer. Both sides talk about avoiding collateral damage. The only promise the frontier trusts is gravity. There's a political gambit on both ends. Islamabad is signaling a red line. Strikes in Kabul will be answered. Safe harbor for the TTP will be punished. The Taliban are signaling reach and resolve. Border posts can be overrun, and the line can be made porous at will. Both signals are designed to shape bargaining positions. It's coercive diplomacy by way of night raids and precision fires. The risk is that signaling becomes the story, and the ladder everyone thought they were climbing turns out to be a slide. This is the part where we level with you. The standard playbook for crises like this says, seek immediate de-escalation and third-party mediation. According to the Taliban, Qatar and Saudi Arabia tried to play that role, briefly. Yet even that claim unfolded alongside allegations of fresh Pakistani artillery fire and ongoing strikes. Mediation is a thin blanket in a cold war. It helps, but it doesn't change the weather. Now, a quick reality check on capabilities. No number of captured vehicles. Remember, that Taliban tarmac parade is going to survive contact with the state's integrated air campaign. If Pakistan chooses to keep the pressure high, Taliban fixed sites will be attrited, and any heavy weapon that fires more than once risks becoming a smoking crater. Conversely, Pakistan can't bomb away an insurgent network any more than you can mow a field and claim the grass has surrendered. Expect both truths to collide every night until one side decides the cost is no longer worth the headline. 3 quick moments of levity, because even in grim times, a little grit humor keeps you sane. First, the Durand Line isn't caution tape you pull down when it's inconvenient. It's a century-old argument carved into mountains that don't care who wins Twitter. Second, if you're firing an RPG across the border and calling it de-escalation, your dictionary is braver than you are. Third, yes, the Taliban do have American vehicles, but a Humvee without an air force is just an expensive Uber with worse music. So where does this go? In the near term, watch for more Pakistani air sorties, and for the Taliban to trade terrain for tempo, snatching small advantages then fading, forcing Islamabad to chase shadows while guarding a long, brittle border.
Watch for the TTP to test Pakistan's interior for soft targets, trying to stretch the state's attention span. And watch for ISKP to exploit the chaos, because that's what it does. Look for the gap everyone else misses, then kick it open. None of this requires a formal declaration to burn real lives. History also lurks in the backdrop. Since Kabul's fall, jihadist ecosystems have found room to breathe. Former enemies exist a bus ride apart from current rivals. Intelligence networks overlap like bad Venn diagrams, and grievances survive longer than any ceasefire. That's the dry grass. This weekend's firefights were the match. It doesn't take a meteorologist to forecast more sparks.
The strategy lens is sobering. If Islamabad's objective is to compel the Taliban to curtail the TTP, it must make the cost of harboring them higher than the cost of restraining them. That requires sustained, precise, politically calibrated pressure. Enough to bite, not enough to blow the roof off the region. If Kabul's objective is to prove sovereignty and strength, it must show it can bite back without inviting a conventional response it can't absorb. Both goals are possible. Both are hard. Both are easiest to pursue before more names get carved into stone. One more note before we close. Everyone's talking numbers. Posts captured, fighters killed, sorties flown. But numbers don't climb mountains. People do. Somewhere on that ridgeline, a 20-year-old in a threadbare jacket is learning how to load a D30 in the dark. And across the line, a 20-year-old in a green flight suit is learning how to paint a moving gun line with a laser. They don't know each other's names, but they're already part of the same story. The only thing that ends it is a choice, made far from the ridgeline, to step back. And that's the knife edge. Pakistan says it will persist until the threats from Afghan soil are neutralized. The Taliban say they've shown what happens if you push too far. UN monitors warn that deeper, darker actors are rebuilding under the mountains. Airfields hum, gun lines wait. The line on the map remains a line on the map, until someone insists it's a finish line. Then it becomes a cliff. The question tonight isn't who won this round. It's whether anyone on either side is ready to stop playing cliff games with a region that's run out of room to fall.